Before we jump in, if you like wearing neckties, there is a Kickstarter down below for a product that I am helping personally work on, so check that out if you have any interest. Recently, I've tried to get away from the stagnant, all too common YouTube formula of read article, then criticize article because article is stupid type of format. I want to do more of the investigations. I want to cover more stories where you see something unique that isn't replicated or parroted 12 times over between a select handful of channels because they all talk about the same things constantly. In my opinion, that's been going rather well for me, at least recently, but sometimes, once in a while, I just can't help myself. This is one of those times because Kotaku is just journalisming all over the place. So many hot, sticky, looping splashes of their journalism. It's just amazing. Really, truly, I couldn't help myself because in a world where China has become a dystopian nightmare of authoritarian surveillance, crimes against humanity, actually, social credit and psychological propaganda manipulation, and more, in that world, the one we all live in, Kotaku found a way to defend them. Here's where I have to admit that I was catastrophically wrong about something. Not that long ago, I did a video about how Kotaku might be witnessing a change of tides. The editor-in-chief at the time, Stephen Totillo, I believe, who served during the start-to-finish degradation of the outlet for 9 years, in my opinion, resigned, which might have been a rational and pointed return to valuable content, perhaps. I speculated that this could be the inflection point where things actually change, and I could not possibly have been more wrong. I don't know why, I don't know how, but let's get into it. Article number 1. Please free me from the bad takes about China's gaming restrictions. That's the headline. Let's ignore the part where this one is possibly the worst take on the entire internet right now, at least in this space, in these circles. The worst take on China's gaming restrictions, so mission failed on that one, on freeing anyone from the bad takes, because that's the king of them all. And instead, let's focus on what it actually contains. Here's my favorite paragraph. Starting from September 1st, players under 18 years of age are restricted to 1 hour of gaming a day on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and public holidays. The restrictions imposed on players don't come from a law. It's an industry regulation recently passed by the National Press and Publication Administration, NPPA. As a parallel example, imagine that you're an American company that wants to dump radioactive waste into a lake, and the Environmental Protection Agency said that you can't do that. Regulations are specific rather than broadly applied to a populace. Broadly applied to a populace. The NPPA is a government regulatory branch that oversees print, online, and broadcast media more broadly, but has sole purview over digital games. End quote. What the actual fuck did I just read? From a technical perspective, it isn't wrong to say that the existing powers of the NPPA are similar in function and scope to those of the EPA, but there is a fundamentally different type of enforcement here. If a company dumps chemicals into a lake, radioactive chemicals, there is a non-choice-based consequence for whoever utilizes that lake's water or relies on any of the surrounding region. This is an immutable reality where those who are affected against their own autonomy, and the negative effects are also universal. That is not, it simply categorically is not a similar situation to what is happening in China right now with video games. And I don't even have some sort of clever metaphor here, because it is such an idiotic perspective, I'm actually shocked. In contrast, a Chinese ban on video games over 3 hours per week, 1 hour per weekend day, is an enforcement on citizens that is being compelled through the service itself that is offered. Dumping toxic waste is neither a service nor is it optional for the people, but video games absolutely are. Failing to realize the foundational premise of why a central action that negatively affects everyone with no exception and is executed by a singular party, and a blanket ban on how people spend their day-to-day lives and time are different, is possibly the most idiotic thing I have read this entire year. Let's move on. Next paragraph. Quote, why do these rules exist? While it might be tempting to generalize the Chinese government as inherently regulatory, it's important to consider that the gaming landscape in China is very different than in North America and Europe. Daniel Ahmad of Nico Partners told Kotaku that around 92 to 95% of the games made in China are based on a free-to-play model. So while most Kotaku readers might think of first-party titles or self-contained indie games as what video games are, most Chinese players will probably think of a free multiplayer online battle arena, MOBA, game like Honor of Kings or gacha games like Genshin Impact. End quote. Wow. Actually, wow. Yes, it's tempting to generalize the Chinese government as inherently regulatory because it is inherently regulatory. There are active concentration camps in the country that are being used by an authoritarian government right now against a particular religious group. There is a social credit score mechanism which, and bear with me here, There's a social credit score system where a journalist, and you would think that they would want to stand by their fellow journalists over there, who focused on governmental corruption as his primary topic, was blacklisted by the government and denied the ability to purchase plane tickets, get a loan, or buy property, among other basic functions. Liu Hu, a Chinese journalist, writes about censorship and corruption, which landed him on a governmental social credit dishonest persons list that denied him a myriad of services and functions simply because an authoritarian government was shutting down dissidents. I don't know how many more examples one might need, but rest assured, there are many. Also, side note, yes, the free-to-play model in Chinese mobile games is an atrocious concept which should be regulated in some capacity, but that is different than regulating the people themselves and controlling their day-to-day lives and time. You would not hear the same criticism if the government implemented anti-gambling or predatory practice laws for children that play mobile titles, forcing the game to adapt its monetization to this new protection mechanism. But that's not what they have done. They aren't targeting the problematic system, which this writer deliberately cites. They are targeting the people who participate in the system. This is like a street corner where a man sells opium. The government has effectively stated that video games are becoming a spiritual opium epidemic in China, by the way. It's like a street corner where a man sells opium to children. Instead of regulating the man who sells the opium and forcing him to, only sell snack food instead, or soda pop or something, if you really believe it's opium and it's bad for the children, you say, well, now kids can only buy and use that opium for an hour at a time on certain days. You don't fix the problem. You simply restrict freedom. Last paragraph. So it's pretty, and this is a quote, by the way, so it's pretty ridiculous to make broad statements about how the Chinese government, what level, which branch, any specific individuals, is necessarily anti-gaming. Shanghai has even been welcoming to foreign offices such as Ubisoft and Activision. So it's weird to see a lot of takes that portray China as an anti-gaming country. This is the biggest esports market in the world, in the country with the most gamers. There's not a single Chinese interest when it comes to gaming, and the country's president isn't the one calling all the shots. End quote. This is just cosmic levels of delusion here. Activision Blizzard and Ubisoft are only allowed to even operate in China because they go through a domestic publishing partner like NetEase, which is forced by the government to have a CCP office that will then compel the company to adhere when called upon for national security, which was redefined in 2017, I think, might have been 2019, I don't remember, to allow them total control when necessary. It is the very definition of authoritarian. Somehow, in this planet, like on this little blue ball spinning through space, somehow, Kotaku ended up with a staff writer defending the CCP in what reads a lot more like state propaganda than an actual journalistic article. And it got printed or published or whatever. I could not have been more wrong about the direction Kotaku was set to go, but we're not even done yet. This one was brought to my attention by WCCF writer Yul Lopez. We've collaborated on things in the past as well, because I had no idea that Kotaku was batting for a world record with their articles this past week. The next piece of fun is a Far Cry 6 preview. But wait, it's not a preview. It's a giant sculpture of rock-hard journalism where the writer rips quotes from other publications out of context to make them look bad while complaining that they didn't hate the game enough. There's some politics thrown in, why wouldn't there be? And all of it when the writer themselves was not even granted access. It's not a criticism of coverage based on experience. It's a criticism of other people for doing their coverage wrong from the sidelines. Now, ordinarily that would be fine. I actually do it kind of often, or I did before I tried to redefine the channel content and direction. But anyways, this writer cut the quotes out of context. That's the important part. The intent here seems pretty clearly geared towards broad strokes condemnation of those who didn't hate the game. But if you actually read the other articles where quotes are drawn from, you will find that they did in fact criticize the game. Quite accurately, I might add, in my opinion. And the quotes used were cherry-picked out of context and used to paint an untrue critical picture. Even other industry writers and editors, and I'm no fan of IGN, believe me, but like the executive editor for IGN or the reviews editor at GamesBeat, they also chimed in, stating that not only were the quotes pulled maliciously and inaccurately, but Kotaku didn't even link them properly. Just to really drive this home, let me read a couple of paragraphs here. First one, from the article titled, "If you're going to preview Far Cry, at least do it right." Quote, The previews seem to just be there to tell us whether the shooting is any good and what novel ways Ubisoft has found to dress up its to-do list icon-filled maps rather than to interrogate why we should expect anything from Far Cry this time around. In some ways, it feels like we've learned nothing at all. Oh, God forbid a preview tell you about the shooting and whether or not it's any... Unbelievable. Continuing on, quote, "Not your granddad's revolution," quipped IGN. "Far Cry 6 is a huge game in every sense," announced VG247. "It looks to be a big, beautiful game," concluded VentureBeat. Those are quotes that absolutely do not indicate the actual preview content for those sources, by the way, but back on task. Even the previews that acknowledge the series' troubled thematic past remained optimistic it might not get in the way this time around. Hopefully, the enjoyment we get from flying around in our wingsuits, firing over-the-top weapons, and fighting alongside a cute wiener dog named Chorizo doesn't contrast too harshly with the story of an island in political peril, wrote Game Informer. "What I've learned from previews like these and others," Kotaku was not invited to those demos, I wonder why you're writing this shit, "is that Far Cry 6 will let you force helicopters to land so you can steal them rather than just blowing them up." End quote. Now, continuing on to a later point in the article, because I can't possibly be forced to just quote and read the entire thing. I won't inflict that pain on you, but here we go for another big section. Quote, "Most previews haven't grappled with the company behind the game either. Some sites currently boycotting Activision Blizzard coverage wrote about Far Cry 6 without even a mention of the fact that hundreds of current and former Ubisoft employees recently petitioned the company for new processes and rules for dealing with workplace abuse. The company might be willing to turn the page on the news cycle and move on, but employees aren't. One of the Ubisoft studios racked by allegations of employee mistreatment was Toronto, which is currently leading development on Far Cry 6. While Sledgehammer Games acknowledged recent allegations during a preview for Call of Duty Vanguard, the obligation to ask Ubisoft about them seems to have expired." End quote. This reads like outrage that the previews didn't, lambast Ubisoft for their corporate culture instead of discuss game mechanics. None of what this writer wants, and I'll spare you the misery of reading any more of their work right now, none of what this writer wants and complains about is relevant to why a vertical slice preview like this exists in the first place. Sure, it's fair to say that Ubisoft are a bit, clowny for saying, "We don't make political games," and then making them constantly. An example would be Umbra from their recent mobile Tom Clancy game, or whatever it was, which basically took BLM, with even the same fist logo, I think, that they use, plus the word Umbra means blackness or something similar, and turned them into a terrorist villain for the game. Agree or disagree with that premise, it's political. I can understand that kind of criticism. Honestly, I can, because Far Cry 6 has a lot of ties to Cuba, if we're being completely honest here, but nothing else makes sense. A staff writer at Kotaku, angry because they didn't get access, does an entire piece about how everyone who did is dumb and wrong, while ripping quotes out of context, and this got approved and published? Man, that site actually does sink lower and lower every single day. Funnily enough, the writer of this piece months ago was openly saying, quote, "We are literally only 3 months out from a whole shitstorm of discourse around Far Cry 6. But now, after the previews come out, it's not a shitstorm of discourse, it's room temperature. Mediocre responses to a game in a franchise that really would be hard-pressed to come across as anything other than repetitive and tired. It's not controversial at all. The only controversial thing that I've seen in this entire news cycle is the article that he himself published, because he's so angry that those who did have access weren't, derailing their own preview into workplace abuse and culture rantings. I am genuinely, unironically amazed at how garbage Kotaku has become. Like I said, I don't want to make this a habit or a staple of the channel like it was in the past, and it really was in the past, because the newer types of content are just so much more interesting. But these two takes this close together, this level of antagonistic pot stirring kind of from Kotaku that isn't even just aimed at YouTubers or gamers. Like, I'm used to that. They do that kind of stuff to their player base, or like their audience, or just the gamers. They do that kind of stuff all the time to certain groups. But this time at their fellow media as well, with like major industry professionals in other companies that compete with them or exist parallel to them coming out and being like, "What the hell was that?" I thought it was worth a segment because, well, sometimes you have to call a spade a spade. But yeah, that's it. If you want to support, there are links down below. Odyssey, which is a YouTube platform alternative, and within about the next week, I'm going to put an exclusive video on Odyssey. Still free, there's no paywall or anything, and I'll probably announce the topic before I actually do it, just so people know what it is, but I'm testing a partnership with them. We're doing like a demo month, and it's going to be bi-weekly exclusive uploads to Odyssey. So click the link down below if you want to get all the stuff. Again, I'll have a community post or an announcement or something like that to pair with it and let everyone know. But yeah, I'll I'll stop with that. Locals, $5 a month, ad-free versions of all the videos, the audio podcast format. That's really just to support the channel beyond the demonetization or the copyright claims or whatever it is, YouTube system. Just more reliable financial support. There's another gaming YouTuber to check out, merch, social media, etc., etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.